This is the third podcast we've done, and we joked that it was the yearly podcast, but I actually do think it's become a yearly podcast, and we're going to sort of maintain this tradition. Because we joked that it might be 6 months, and then after that 3 months, and eventually it just keep halving, and we'd go live at some point. But no, I think this might be the yearly tradition, which I'm up for, if you are.
Yeah, I think so. At some point we'll be like 90-year-old men, like... talking across the pond at each other in our respective retirement homes.
Yeah.
Age of Empires 6 maybe has come out because it's taken that long.
It's following the trend, it probably will be Age of Empires 6.
Yeah, it'll be Age of Empires 6. Maybe 7 if they get ambitious some point in there.
Yeah, it will be about the colonization of Mars and the wars that raged on the planet for 100 years.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think by the time we're 90, we might have like Age of Empires like Moon Edition or something like that.
Yeah, you can play as Elon Musk.
Driving around in Teslas and...
on the moon.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
They've recovered the one they sent around the Kuiper Belt or whatever it was.
What was the purpose of that? Was it just literally a publicity stunt?
Yeah, well, it doesn't serve any function. Putting a fucking Tesla in space isn't constructive or utilitarian in any way. It's just like, hey, I'm Elon Musk, I can launch cars into space, and Tesla is awesome, why don't you buy some?
He should have sent me that car, and...
I don't think it would have had the same effect.
And I would have taken a picture of it and done like maybe a little Photoshop or something, put a nice little like solar background in there, and I'd be happy because I had a car, and he'd be happy because he had a car in space.
You don't think the actual like physical live stream had that much bearing on it, where there was literally like a model, like a mannequin in a fucking spacesuit, like driving past the Earth?
No,
that wasn't.
No, certainly not. It has no appeal.
Okay. Oh, man. We also talked about last time, we were talking about Age of Empires 4 and the possible, like, hey, Jimmy, they're remastering Age of Empires 1. What could that mean? And you said, well, they don't do it randomly.
Yeah.
They don't just, like, look at the shelf and go, oh, hey, what shall we remaster today? Ooh, this one, Age of Empires 1.
You know the old boxes they used to come in, like the super big...
Oh, yeah.
And it came with, like, the nice book and, like, all the CDs, because, of course, you had to have, like, a pack of CDs to install.
Age of Empires 3 literally did come on 3 CDs. You had to put them all in, didn't you?
Yeah.
And, yes, they came with, like, those little manuals with the tech tree and all sorts of... Yeah. But now you just buy them on Steam and you don't get any of that, but go ahead.
I just imagine like some guy like walking past like a closet at Microsoft. He's like, oh, I wonder what's in here, and he like opens it up, and there's like a case of like dusty video games. And he pulls one down, and it's Age of Empires 1. He blows it off, and like, oh yeah, let's do this one. Let's do this one, and he brings it back to the crew, and they like start fixing it.
They're like, oh yeah, well, let's fix this.
Yeah.
Okay, turned out Age of Empires 1 was not the remaster. I just couldn't play it. Holy shit, the pathing in that game is awful.
I didn't actually ever play it. I watched a couple videos of it, and I watched some Twitch streams of it, and I was like, yeah, it's Age of Empires 1, which has like a little nostalgia value for me, but ultimately, I never even really played the game like on a serious level.
Yeah.
The first of those games that I actually played and like knew how to play was Age of Empires 2, and so it's nothing more than a small bit of nostalgia from when I was like 6 years old, and outside of that, like I don't really know anything about it. I don't know how to play the game. I don't know like any of the mechanics or have ever like tried to play it seriously. I barely know what the units do. I watched a couple streams of it, and that was enough for me ultimately.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I tried to play it competitively a bit. I think Give You Anxiety did as well, and it was fun. And like, so there were some cool build orders, but really they kept the pathing from the original game. So like, This is a game where the units don't make formations. They just like bumble around and hit each other, and oh my god, and like they can't find out where to go, and like, and that's part of the game. That's why they didn't change it, because the pros, like they manage that. They know what they're doing. They have to individually click the units and bring them to the correct locations, and half your fucking APM is spent on pathing, like so that units just don't randomly like die or go somewhere they're not supposed to.
It's like the original StarCraft game, right, where you can only put, I don't remember what it is, like 8 units in a group, or you can only control 8 units at a time by like dragging a box around them. So in order to be like good at that game, in order to like move your whole army efficiently, you have to like continually like move 8 units at a time like into different spots of the map. So if you have like 80 units, right, like that's 10 little boxes you need to draw on, like 10 little groups of units that you need to move around with you.
Yeah, and certainly you can be skilled at doing that, and obviously the pros are, and the more skilled you are, the better you are. But for a modern RTS, it just wasn't fun, right? Like, it was so clunky and horrible. I tried playing some of the campaigns because I quite like doing those, and I put them on the hardest difficulty setting and found it really hard, probably because it was on the hardest difficulty setting, but that's how it goes.
Ultimately, it just wasn't a game that really appealed to me.
But we joked, like, they've got to be doing it for a reason, right? And we were like, oh, maybe this could mean Age of Empires 4, and I think literally 2 weeks after we released the podcast, boom, announcement, Age of Empires 4.
Yeah.
And we look like idiots because, well, I don't know, maybe we look fucking really clever because we did it.
We look like geniuses.
Yeah, we did it beforehand. That was interesting. What do you think of that? Were we spot on? How do you feel about our prediction?
I think we both, we knew, right? We knew that if their intention for the Age of Empires series was to turn it off, end of life it, never make another game, they thought that they had seen it to its end and they weren't going to invest in it anymore, they wouldn't do it, right? Like, they obviously have an appetite. They have a development team that they've hired to help support Age of Empires. They have production staff and artists, and I mean, when you make games like this, right, you need to have like content producers, right? You need to have people looking up historical facts and like fact checking like what the units are wearing and stuff like that. If you have an appetite to continue that, you've got all of those people in place, and you need to have something for them to do. Well, maybe the legal details or the whatever details of the game like coming into an envisionment actually are. And from my perspective, the reason why I said that was, well, this seems like a nice little like warm-up project or ramp-up project to get people familiar with the product and some of how the technology works to make it work, and start playing around with something that's a classic so that they can get exposure to what fans of the series have previously liked. And it just seemed like a natural progression that this is the kind of thing you would do with a development team or an engineering team or with a game studio to launch into a production of a next version.
Oh, I see. Okay. Just get some experience behind them with the franchise and how the games work and how people feel about them. And, yeah.
And if their true intention was just to shut it off and be done, then they would have never done that, right?
Well, because I wondered if it was a cash grab, like it's just low-hanging fruit and then they can make a buck off it.
I mean, I'm sure they can make a buck off of it, but I would expect that the return on that is relatively low. Like, I mean, there's probably not a ton of people who bought it and then they ended up selling it for like they can't sell it for a huge price, right? They can't sell like Age of Empires 1 remastered for $59, right? But I guarantee you when Age of Empires 4 comes out, guess what price it's going to be on it, right? It's going to be some like pretty high expensive price. Like, they're going to be able to sell it because it's never before seen content.
Yeah, but they sold Age of Empires 1 HD quite highly. My thoughts are, okay, yes, getting exposure for the company, just so they know sort of how the games work and what the fans like. But also, we said they want to populate their Windows store and maybe make a competitor to Steam. It feels like that's what Microsoft wants to do with everything. They're pushing their version of Amazon now, where they've got this, I'm not sure what that's called. They made a version of Twitch. Yeah. They seem to just want to like do everything, and maybe they hope one day one of them will stick. What I think they want to do is populate their Steam store, essentially, with games. And Age of Empires 1 HD is, one that they can put there that people will buy. And then I think that leads the way into Age of Empires 2, and that's a really good one for them to reclaim, so to speak. They gave it a go with the HD, but honestly, no one wanted to switch from Voobly. Like, the actual people that play the game still, they still use the Voobly client, and that's where Ranked is, and that's where most of the players are. Certainly, you can get a game on Steam just because it's so easy to download there, and you don't have to mess around with user patches or anything like that, but they need to do it right. And I think this final definitive edition for Age of Empires 2, I think what that will encompass is all of the features Voobly has and more, plus new unit models and a toggle to go back to how they originally looked, and a proper like leaderboard, an official, lots of support, and something that will just look so attractive it will just Voobly won't be able to keep up because everyone will want to switch. I feel like that's what they should be aiming for. Age of Empires 1 certainly didn't achieve that, but I don't think it needed to because there wasn't really a competitive player base for it. In fact, Age of Empires 1 didn't have Ranked when they released it on their store, but I think Age of Empires 2 is considerably more competitive. There are actually people making content about that game still who earn a fair amount of money, I think, based on the views that they get. but also the tournaments that happen and how competitive the game is. People are really serious about Age of Empires 2. I think there's an esports opportunity that Microsoft would be really crazy to not capitalize on.
I think it's tough for them. So a couple things on those thoughts is I think both of us, especially me previously, underestimated how big like the single player fan base is. But like when you look at the number of people playing it competitively versus the number of people that they can just have that like nostalgia grab and are just going to spend $20 to like relive their childhood for an afternoon, like that's I think there's a lot of people in that boat that it's sometimes difficult to discount.
Okay, so you think that might be perhaps even the main source of money, so they need to hit the single player right as well. And I think they will. They could expand the amount of triggers. They could basically just make the scenario editor better, add more single-player content, and I think, honestly, they probably will. You look how many civilizations they've released in Age of Empires 2. It feels like they bring out a few more civs every other bloody month. Like, there's so many expansions. It's like 4 or 5 expansions to that now, and I think so few people will have bought them all. Like, most people buy Age of Empires 2 on Steam, and then they won't buy any of the DLC. They'll just have that first one. A feature I like in Age of Empires 2 HD on the Steam one is there's a rotation. You know how, like, on League of Legends, I don't know if they still do, but they used to, like, rotate a bunch of heroes and you could play them for a bit every week and then they would change. They do that on Age of Empires 2 with the Steam. Like, a few of, like, the civilizations from the DLC just become available every now and again and you can use them, which I think is a really good feature. But I think a definitive edition, what that will do is take all this content, all of these civilizations, and just put it into one price package.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
And that feels necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's smart. I think it's a good idea.
There's an opportunity to make a lot of single-player content out of those civilizations. Maybe, you know, obviously all the original campaigns, but then, you know, there's a bunch of storylines in other countries with different nations to explore, which will be fun if people they want a new Age of Empires 2 experience, a nostalgic sort of wise, do a couple of those.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it'd be a great idea.
Well, I've been thinking this with Age of Empires 3. If there's going to be a definitive edition, what they have to do is take all of the Age of Empires, you know, the war chiefs, the Asian dynasties, and sell it under one price tag. Well, they'd be stupid not to, because our player base is currently split between vanilla and the Asian dynasties. It's always been roughly 50-50. I think it favors the dynasties now. But that's still people that just aren't on the same game browser looking at the same games that could be queuing into each other. And that split community, I feel like, just makes it longer for everyone to find games.
Honestly, that was a huge mistake in Age of Empires 3. Like, that should have never happened. Like, honestly, what they should have done is the War Chiefs expansion in the Asian dynasties, they should have been standalone packs that you could buy, but there should have been like a server update that gave like the balance changes and all of the changes that happened in between to everyone. And like it should have just unlocked the new civilizations. Like you just play the new civilizations and the people who didn't buy the expansions like just couldn't play the new civilizations. Like they were just stuck out of those civilizations.
So they'd go into a match and their opponent picks, say, Japan, but they don't have the Asian dynasties installed, so they're like, oh, well, I'll have to play France because that's their favorite civilization and they only have vanilla. And they could do France versus Japan, but the guy that only has Nilla couldn't then go and pick Japan because he doesn't own Japan. But he can still play against Japan. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and just had everyone like merged into one server.
Yeah, they needed a unified game browser. How would ranked, you know, like a quick search work?
I don't know. I think it'd just be, I mean, maybe this is just the business side of me taking over and people will probably shriek at the fact that I'm having these ideas, but I think it would have been fine to just have people who didn't have those civs, like, you don't play with them, right? Like, they're not an option for you to choose, like, an
Of course, it would work the same way. You just queue up, and if you queued into someone queuing Iroquois, well, so be it. You play against Iroquois, and you... No, I think that would be absolutely fine. Anyone that takes the game seriously would surely have all of the, you know, that wanted to be at the top of the leaderboard, would have all the expansions. So it's only going to affect those people that just sort of play for fun. And, they're surely going to be doing this in the definitive edition. Like, that's something they've absolutely got to do, right?
And the thing is, like, the balance patches for the war chiefs that affected vanilla, like the further expansion, like they didn't get retroactively added back into vanilla, and so like vanilla is in this like broken state where
Spanish have
Spain are just like ridiculously overpowered and have never gotten a balance patch since like 1.14 or whatever the last vanilla patch is, and they're just ridiculously overpowered.
So you feel like basically all of the balance changes that come with the Asian dynasties, every time there's an update we get new balance changes, they'd just be applied to the vanilla civs, and if you own vanilla, that's just how your civ is now. So it's like everyone has the same game, but the content is locked. That's something they're absolutely going to do.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that would be a smart and hopefully not difficult thing to do.
I'm sure that can't be hard.
It's funny when you say like something in software, like surely it can be hard. Like as someone who now works in a software company, like sometimes the things that seem like they should be trivial and like you should have no problem accomplishing are things that turn into impossible nice to haves just for some random architectural reason that was made years ago, or some spaghetti code like back-end reason that like just doesn't make sense but is true. Sometimes the kinds of things that seem like they should be possible and there's no reason not to include them have like very difficult technical challenges behind them.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's why they didn't do it in the first place.
Yeah, well, either that or I don't know. It's tough to know. Right.
When the game was released, back when they released the War Chiefs and the Asian Dynasties in 2007 and 8 or whenever it was, we didn't have internet speeds like we do now, and issuing an update, like a full balance patch, and because then people that own Nilla would have to have the Asian Dynasty civs, and that's surely quite a lot of models and maps and all sorts of textures and things like that to download over the internet, and people just wouldn't then be able to play. So I guess they had to package it separately just because of the time period and the internet speed, and you can't like send people updates like you can now over the internet.
Yeah, that's one thing that I actually sometimes frequently forget about Age of Empires, because it looks like so beautiful, honestly. Sometimes I forget it's a 13-year-old game now, right? Like back in 2005, we didn't all have high-speed internet, and like the way that games are packaged and released it was far different back then to what they are currently.
How do you feel about the home city mechanic in Age of Empires 3? We've said before it's really dumb that you have to level up this city to unlock the cards, to access the politicians that you need. It's just, a barrier to entry for people that want to play competitively or even just have some fun with a few decks that actually work. Do you think there should be no home city leveling in the definitive edition? So you just start with access to all the cards and all the politicians. How do you feel about this? What is the answer?
I think we've talked about this before, and when we do our yearly podcast, it's sometimes difficult to remember what it is we've talked about. I'm sure there's someone who like at some point is going to watch these like back to back to back.
And be like, what the?
We're going to be talking about like the same.
It's the same podcast 3 times in a row.
It's going to be 30% overlap like between the various different topics, but I do agree. Like, I think the leveling up mechanic and unlocking cards, and especially the unlocking politicians, like at certain levels, maybe you know this and maybe you don't because you played the game for so long, but you need a level 40 home city with France to get the quartermaster politician in Age 2.
Whoa!
Right?
Yeah,
And it's just ridiculous. Like, why should you have to wait until level 40 to be able to send something that it's like part of the build order, right? It's the most common thing in the world. In fact, I can't think of a situation where France wouldn't age with 400 wood.
Yeah.
Everyone ages with 400 wood.
You might go 500 food for some fast fortress, but that's probably always really...
Yeah.
It's probably not a great strategy almost all of the time.
Especially at a high level of play. It's like almost always the 400 wood, because it gathers so slowly, is always going to be the better choice. And the fact that back in the 2005 days, like you had to wait for a long period of time to even consider sending that is like, to me, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think they should remove the restrictions on politicians immediately.
Yeah.
That's just dumb. I think home city leveling has always been part of the game, and it's like, you can level up your city, and when it gets to 131, there's a degree of prestige of having like a maxed out home city.
Yeah.
And I think they should somehow keep that element. But what I think they should also have is a button that literally just says unlock all cards, and then boom, you've got access to them all. So you could do it with a level 1 city, and you could have all the cards, and it's like, from a competitive standpoint, absolutely fine. But you can still level up your home city the old way if you want to, and access the cards the old way if you feel like that's something you want to do. And you can still eventually get to level 131, because I presume they won't have any XP mods or nonsense that we do currently. Because at the moment, getting a 131 city, I could just make all my cities 131 immediately. Right. And there's not a lot of prestige there, because you didn't work for it.
I think that all of the cards and all the politicians should be unlocked for people who want them right from the get-go. And I agree with you. I do like the concept of like having the prestige of like putting time into a civilization or making it look like you're like good at that civ because you've played it a lot or whatever. I like that idea, but I don't think it should be tied to any sort of like competitive advantage or anything like that. Like maybe make like badges or something, or extra things you can do like in your clan message board, or I don't know, whatever it is.
I see.
It should be something that's completely external to the way that the core gameplay actually functions.
You know how people like customizing stuff nowadays, like skins and all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
You can do this actually already in the game. You unlock skill points, which allow you to customize your home city and like add little banners and flags and change the texture on the buildings or the color of the sky, or make it nighttime or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably what it would still contribute to. And they need to like show off the home cities in a more meaningful way so that people can see your customizations. It's more like visible to them, and like it's more thrown in their face, a bit like card backs on Hearthstone and skins on on other video games. Perhaps you could even like maybe a couple of units, for example, the Explorer or your War Chief, maybe he could like have little customizations too, so like you could change his hat or something like that.
Yeah, give the War Chiefs like fancy headdresses or something like that. That would be way better than making it so you can't age with 400 wood until you've played 300 games with a civ or something like that.
Yeah, obviously I'd be worried about changing the skins for all units, like suddenly your musketeers look different from other musketeers. That might not be good, because you need the units in an RTS game to be immediately identifiable. But the Explorer is quite identifiable all of the time. So maybe like obvious buildings like factories and town centers. I don't know. Maybe you could have like subtle skins, or you could just go with the home city. But I like the idea of customization being more of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. I'm curious to see what direction they take that.
Yeah. You know, I feel like cracking open a beverage. I did this last time.
Oh, that sounds good. What do you got over there?
I'm actually addicted to tonic water, of all things.
Okay. Just normal tonic water?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I've slimlined this time, you know, watching the calories.
I see.
But although I like beer and gin and tonic and all these things, but just tonic water on its own, it's delicious.
I don't know if I've ever drank just tonic water.
Yeah. Well, I found that it's like a drink I like that doesn't have much sugar in when it's slimline.
Okay.
And it doesn't have caffeine in it either, which is important. So I can drink it, because right now it's like 10 p.m. my time.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I used to think that caffeine didn't affect my ability to sleep, but I've come to find recently that I think it does. Because I remember in college I used to drink Coke and stuff like before bed all the time, and it didn't bother me at all, or I thought it bothered me not at all. It could also have something to do with the fact that I was going to bed like super late and all of that jazz.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I've come to find recently that if I try to go to bed at a reasonable time, it's difficult for me to actually sleep.
Yeah, there's a difference when you're like, you know, staring at your phone in your bed and you just stay up so long that you just physically can't stay awake anymore. I think the amount of caffeine you've had there doesn't really stops mattering. But yeah, if you're not like about to fall asleep, you're so tired, I guess the caffeine, if you're going to bed at a reasonable time, actually, yes.
Yeah, I think it's super disruptive.
Yeah. So, spectator mode. How difficult do you think it would be to make a proper spectator mode, or do they just piggyback off what Aza has already achieved?
Honestly, like, if I were them, I mean, I'm sure A's would, for no cost or for a very cheap amount of money, sell them his work on the spectator mode. And I can't speak for him because I'm not him, but my guess would be that he'd be willing to help out the community. And maybe, like, they just gave him, like, kudos in the game, right? Like, hey, this thing was built by blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And for me, personally, like, that would be enough for me if I were A's. But it can't be that hard. If we had a one-man dev team put it together and accomplish it independently, right? Like, I would assume that there's got to be a way they can get it into the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, the way his UI works is, like, very hackily, does a bunch of stuff. Like, it's not intuitive at all. To them, it would be spaghetti code, but it's the only way to get, you know, like, the resources to display is by having the map send random characters to a separate program that interprets that. because you have to install a whole program for it to work. The maps interact with his UI, and they're special maps.
Right.
And I think like it would just be so weird for them to implement that as an official thing, because it's just like not proper. Like it's not actually a good, well put together thing.
Yeah.
But it's the only thing that works unless they like fix their source code, or I don't know, one of these technical terms. So they need to like do something to get a proper one.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that changing the source code would be that difficult, given what we've seen A's accomplish outside of the confines of being able to like actually change the source code. I wouldn't think it would be that difficult for them. It's hard to know. Like I said before, until you've opened the Pandora's box of like what it is that their back-end systems look like, it's difficult to actually know.
How difficult do you think it would be as a expert in the field, perhaps, although you've not looked or know really very much about Age of Empires 3 at all, how difficult to make a proper observer mode like we see in Voobly or in other actual RTS games?
I don't think it should be hard. I think if you had, one or two people working on that particular feature, it could take them under a month. That would be my professional opinion, but that's also kind of just like a shot in the dark, given, like I said before, I don't know like what it is they're working with. Like there could be something really dumb that, I don't know, let's say for example, the number of players that are tied into the game are like tied to the networking code, right? And so like it's impossible for them to get more players in the game or something without the like underlying assigned teams. Because if you think about the way that like AZAs work, right, it like automatically resigns the players and like formats the map so that it pretends like those players never existed.
But they're probably still on a team.
Yeah, and they still have probably like hooks into like all the network code for being able to whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe like something weird happens there. And so if it goes down a rabbit hole of needing interface with the networking code or something, right? Like it could have implications like far deeper than what you anticipate, then it could be really hard.
Okay.
It could be like a non-starter, like, no, it's just not something we can do.
For that specific example, I know like A's has managed to get 2v2v2 to work and stuff like that. There could just be some random thing, and we don't know what it might be, like that just makes something that sounds easy really tough.
Yeah.
But you're not actually saying what it is, you're just giving a realistic example that could be true.
It's just really tough to know.
What do you think they'll do with the online capabilities? So currently we're peer-to-peer, and if you want, you can sniff someone's IP, which is probably not a good thing in the modern world. Do you think they'll have a dedicated server? Do you think people will, like how League of Legends and other competitive games work, have an intermediary server in the middle where you both connect to? Or do you think that's not something they'll invest in? Maybe it would be piggybacked off the Age of Empires 4 servers that they're going to have to make in the future, which I assume they will try and have a competitive scene, given the size of Age of Empires 2's one. Maybe they'll have dedicated servers for Age of Empires 4 and they'll piggyback their other games on them.
Yeah, they could. My guess would be for Age of Empires 3, like Definitive Edition, I wouldn't expect them to change the networking code. In fact, the networking code among all Age games is all the same and all equally terrible. It's pretty shady, right? I mean, it's just the networking code in general in Age games isn't that great, right? We see all these like laggy things, and there's like all these like things you can do to abuse the lag that like involve like drop tricking and like these various exploits and stuff, right? Yeah. And so the networking code in Age games is historically pretty bad. And so my hope would be that for Age of Empires 4 that they actually kind of like take a fresh start and use some modern, server-based architectures for the actual implementation. But I know up until this point for Age of Empires 1, 2, Mythology, 3, and Online, all 5 of those games have more or less had the same look and feel to their networking code, which has been one of the bigger hindrances, I think, to like the competitive scene.
Yeah, I guess that's just a facet of being such old games, and Age of Empires Online maybe just being built off of a previous game.
Yeah, definitely. My guess would be to expedite the actual amount of time that it took to implement the core game. The actual content and some of the various different units and models and all of that stuff, of course, was built from the ground up. But if you look at a lot of the other stuff, the way that the hotkeys, for example, between games has very high correlation. The way that the networking code has very high correlation. The pathing, if you look at the way that units path, and I'm just going to use the two games that I'm most familiar with, Age of Empires 3 and Age of Empires Online, the way that they move and the way that like sometimes they bump and do weird things or take weird routes because of the way they bump is all more or less the same. And so you can like tell from just being an observer a patient observer of those games that like they're probably using the same like back-end libraries to actually go about implementing various pieces of the code. So my hope is they try and fix some of those things and not just like, kind of like we've said before, just try and like make the quick buck and get something out the door quick and kind of reskin the old Age 3 engine.
I think they are in it for the long haul because they've announced Age of Empires 4 and all these definitive editions with a 10-year plan, which I think seems that they're committed to making, you know, something that will actually be good for 10 years at least. So that seems like a reasonable amount of time for a game. But I'm sure they'll update the networking because it's Microsoft and they want to make everything Xbox. So, you know, they're going to have some sort of connection to Xbox Live, and so you can chat with people that are signed into their Xbox or whatever. I don't know. Yeah,
we'll have to see. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think Microsoft has hopefully learned some lessons in various other things that they've done with the Age series, and, you know, certainly they're a company with a ton of resources behind them and a ton of ability, so hopefully they can fix some of those things.
I agree. They've gone through many things, and there's many lessons that they probably have hopefully learnt, but do you think it's a company that learns, or is it the people that were working there at the time, which may no longer be like the people that worked on the Age series back in the day and made all those mistakes? Sure, they learnt their lessons, but are they around now to, like, you know, make a better game? Or do you think the company in general somehow remembers, or they have logs, or how does this work? What's your opinion on that?
I would think that, so from like that perspective, like a lot of the people that you're hoping make the right decisions are like the executive producers and some of the like the executives that are associated with making those constraints in the first place, right? Because I work in engineering and I know how engineering teams work, quite frequently the mentality behind an engineering team is like, let's make this thing like as perfect and flawless as we can, right? And the reason why you are not able to make things as beautiful or awesome or great as you can is because you have some business executive breathing down your neck saying, hey, we need this thing by November, like, can you do it, right? And so from that perspective, then sometimes maybe say, okay, well, like, we don't have half a year to rewrite all the networking code, and so we're just gonna copy and paste the old networking code in because it pretty much works, and like, let's see if we can get it done in November, right? And so the people who you're hoping make the right decisions are not necessarily the individuals that are building the games and producing the content, because I think we largely agree the content and the beauty of the games and the like the actual gameplay and the some of the mechanics and the stories and all of that kind of stuff is like really, really solid across all of the Age games. It's just that sometimes I think there are business mistakes that happen, and what I'm hoping is that Microsoft has learned from those business mistakes, and whether it's a new executive that's leading the project or an old one or one that has hopefully at least been up to speed on what the Age series has accomplished up until this point, like I would think that there would be the person leading it would have hopefully the mentality of like making this like cool game for an old dedicated franchise that has this very large consumer base who's willing to hopefully spend a lot of money buying it and playing it and for many years to come.
Actually, that does sound more like companies, remember. You just got to find the right man for the job who understands what it is and can learn from how previous projects went. So I guess actually, you know, that's all there written in history for them to know about. So should be okay, providing they get it right.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Okay, let's talk about anti-cheat detection and prevention like in ESOC patch.
Yeah.
So currently in Age of Empires 3 it is possible to cheat. People might be familiar with the idea of Moe's bar hacks, which was the name of the player who found ways to basically inject into the code an ability to spawn resources and units and modify the stats of things and making models invisible so stuff's attacking your town center and you can't right-click it and all this nonsense. ESOC patch does a good job of, you know, detecting and stopping that. Do you not think that a lot of the definitive edition will just be a copy and paste job from ESOC patch?
I don't know. So the thing about like fan-supported patches, and having worked on several of them, I know this for a fact, is you're confined by what you can do with like the modifiable externally facing program files, right? And so that's like some of the various metadata files that like describe how the units work or what their stats are or various things like that, right? The actual power from making those things explicitly impossible to happen is by being able to hold the back-end server code and being able to actually maintain consistency of the files, right? And so like the whole like concept of like CRC mismatch, like that's supposed to like prevent people with like incompatible versions of the game like playing with each other, right? So honestly, in my opinion, I think What it really comes down to is there wasn't community support, right? If you look at the past 7-8 years, right, most of the issues have cropped up in that time. Before that, there were some cheats and the double deck hacking and all of that kind of stuff, right? But it got remedied and it got fixed in a finite way because there was a community supporting it and a dev team supporting it, and it just got like truly fixed, right? Whereas in the past 7-8 years, the bugs that have continued to maintain and be existent haven't gotten fixed, and so they've just gotten more and more widespread because there's no one really that's being a watchdog and making sure that people get banned or bugs get fixed or anything like that.
Do you think if it were, instead of for being peer-to-peer, it was on a server, would that fix these problems too?
It would help. I mean, it would remove some of the potential exploitable loopholes.
Yeah.
But it's tough to say. I think it probably would help. But that's a much more modern concept. Like the client-server architecture for video games is a much more modern concept than like the peer-to-peer style is.
So you don't think it's, they can just take a lot of what ESOC patch has done with the detection and prevention and just put it in there, or look at what they've done and do something similar, coded themselves. If that's not a copy and paste job, how do you feel about maps? We've made so much content. Well, when I say we, I mean the individuals like Gargia and Juracan, all the people, Rikiki, have made maps.
Yeah.
Those surely, can't they just put them in as is? And maybe, something stupid like, we need 4v4 King of the Hill support, and, that can't be difficult to add.
No, that kind of thing explicitly, that should 100% be a copy-paste job. The whole arguments between like balance patches as well, which are things that are made to better the game by editing those externally facing configuration files and metadata files, like that's absolutely something that should just be a copy-paste job. And my hope would be that they do take up some of that content. Absolutely.
Like all of our maps and perhaps our balance patch.
Yeah, definitely.
And that could be an ongoing thing, right? People are always making maps and we're always adjusting our balance, getting closer to what we think is ideal. So you think that would go in?
Yeah, I think it should. Will it? Uncertainty of like...
Well, it has to, right? I mean,
no.
What are they looking for maps-wise? They need to add the fresh experience.
It wasn't made by them, right? So there's like all sorts of legal implications.
Is it though, like surely in their terms of service agreement, it says like anything that runs in our game is ours and this is our map. And how can you copyright an Age of Empires? Like Gaia can't go, nah, these are my maps. You can't put them in your Age of Empires 3 game, even though they're... Like surely they've written something in some terms of service agreement, like saying you can't modify the game, and if you do, this is ours.
I don't know. I will tell you, as a company who's working for a company who has dealt with legal things, lawyers are very particular about what they will allow to be included as like content for an officially represented brand. And even if there is like a pretty explicit legal statement that makes something seem very, very clear, oftentimes they will just shy away from third-party agreements and things that have been made by third parties just because it's easier to explicitly protect from a legal perspective things that your company has built and you have the intellectual property rights on.
Oh, but they can't not put it in. It would be such a shit game if they didn't, because half the issue with Age of Empires 3, like some of the biggest issues that arise are from map balance. Like the game would be so much better with actually good maps made by actually good players that know how to put resources and make actually interesting things that would affect the gameplay in a way that's meaningful. Right? Like, we have the players and they've made the maps already. And what are they looking for, really? Like, it has to be consistent with what they've already got in there. Like, the Great Plains, New England, right? Like, they're looking for maps that are consistent with areas in the United States or other places, Asia, where the Asian dynasties, etc. are. They're looking for, like, actual maps that are realistic. Not, say, like, Erebus in the underground or, Midgard in the middle of... like in Asian mythology, which does get away with it because obviously Asian mythology is mythology and they can... But we haven't made like stupid maps. We're fitting within the theme, and all of the maps that have been made have come out of, realistic places and actual terrain that exists and places in the world. And it's like, basically it's built in reality that the Age of Empires 3 is set in.
I completely agree with you. And trust me, from like a personal preference standpoint, I'm right on board with you. I strongly believe Garge's maps are... That and the A's mod are two of the things that kept competitive Age of Empires alive for the past 3 or 4 years, especially these last 3 or 4 years, as the rest of the community support started to drop. Really, the influx of new content by Garja and the ability to spectate the game in like a proper way with all the information that's available from A's is 100% what kept the game alive from a competitive side. Like, you can make the argument of, oh, like players like playing and like people like to see high level players. No, like that's fine. Like high level players have come and gone. There's really no doubt, and hopefully nobody burns me at the stake for this statement, but the level of play is just not as good as it used to be. And that's okay, right? Because now we can see it in crystal clear 1080p with all of the text available on these beautiful maps, and it's better in every way, right? I would far rather watch a game played between, two PR40s now than I would a game from 8 years ago against two PR48s, right? It's head and shoulders. The gameplay is far more entertaining to watch because you can see it all happening.
Yeah. Especially when PR40s nowadays, A's is actually PR40, so he could be one of the PR40s, and I think A's games in particular. Anyway, that's not your point, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with you. I love the content, but I just know that having worked for a company that has some of those similar like intellectual property concerns and what constitutes being mine and yours, and how much am I willing to bet that this person is not going to get involved in a expensive legal battle with me? Because remember, you can be 100% legally correct, right? But if it draws into a long legal confrontation, even a legal confrontation that you know you're going to win, right? If you dedicate the resources to it, you're guaranteed to win. It's still, I don't know, $30 million in legal fees. And if your margin for the game is $20 million that you're making, why would you want to risk spending $30 million in legal fees? The numbers don't necessarily add up.
I think they will put the maps in, though, just because I know that's what Gaia and everybody would want. I just think they're going to do it. And maybe they get Gaia to sign a waiver saying, these maps are not mine, I can never go to court, blah, blah, blah. I guess they do that for protection. But as you're saying, your point still stands. But all things, at the end of the day, I don't think it would be the definitive edition without those maps.
No.
So I think they'll put them in.
I love those maps. I definitely hope to get included. But I could see why they wouldn't.
I just don't think Microsoft, the people making the game, they wouldn't know what they're doing enough to make a good map. Sure, they could make a better map than we have currently, but I think you need quite deep knowledge of the game to make map features, for example, like the ones we see now where like there's the interesting map features that actually affect the game in a meaningful way rather than just being some random map feature.
I mean, that's the argument that like all of the fan patches and all of the map content that anyone from the high level community has ever made has, and the ground that they stand on and will continue to stand on is we play this game at a high level. We have a pretty good idea of what it is that makes a map good, what it is that makes a map balanced, what it is that makes a civ good, what it is that makes a civ balanced. And like some person that you hire off the street probably isn't going to have that same context and that same ability. That's always been the grounds that having, fan-made contributions have stood on for Age of Empires 3 as far as I'm concerned. But it's tough to know whether or not that will override some of Microsoft's concerns. The best thing they could do, right, is similar to when I worked on Age of Empires Online, right? Like pay someone who knows something about the Age series to actually come in and do in-house consultation. And from that perspective, that gives you the best chance at meeting both of those goals of having someone working for the company so the intellectual property is yours and still getting, the high level opinion of that person.
I see. I was going to ask you that. So the next step would be to hire A's to make a UI, would be to hire our map makers, Gaia, everyone, to make maps. And they'd be different maps, but when they made them, they'd be working for the company, and obviously everything you make when you work for the company is the company's.
Right.
So that would be a way around it. I just don't think they would have the money aside for... I don't know, I wonder if Gaia would take a job doing that, even if it wasn't well paid.
Yeah, and then it gets into, more complexities of, Garja, for example, we both know lives in Italy, and Microsoft, of course, is an American company, and so...
Yeah, you'd need a special visa.
And then things get complex from that perspective as well. So it's hard. It's very hard.
1 second, I need another tonic water. Anyway, I couldn't help but notice on your Facebook page that you're now a manager.
Yeah.
How's that going?
It's good. I like it. I came to find that the skill set that I was good at work wasn't necessarily strictly speaking, like the hard technical skills. It was more like the interpersonal skills and that kind of stuff. So I switched roles about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I actually really like it. It's really fun.
You mentioned at one point that you feel like you've got more charisma or something, or you feel better at speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the practice you've had, perhaps online.
Absolutely. Like, everything to do with SmackDown. Like, the talking in front of, like, a large audience and, like, learning how to slow down your words so that when you do have a conversation or you don't necessarily know where a conversation is going, or you need to like come up with like filler words like I'm doing now to just buy yourself time so that you can have like an idea to come up with whatever it is you're going to say. Like all of that is like super relevant to like both the workplace and casting in general. Like it's their skill sets are completely coordinated.
Just saying stuff and coming up with saying something else and having a think and then eventually you have an idea like I just had there.
Sometimes in both in the workplace and in casting, like you need to talk to be interesting, but while you're talking to be interesting, you're also using that as time to like generate like the next actual constructive thought that you're actually going to say, right? Like you might just literally when you're casting go into a brain dump of just describing whatever it is you see on the screen for 20 seconds so that you can think of like a super constructive thought or like do some quick addition on some numbers or something on the side or tab out and fix something, right? Like it's just like a defense mechanism when you're casting to like actually buy time for the real content.
I don't know how politicians do it because they always seem to be speaking content, or do you disagree?
I disagree. I think and I think if you look at a lot of people who make like a living at public speaking, they've had a lot of practice. They've had a lot of practice, and they follow some of like the same general principles. Like they speak very slowly, right? Like I think a lot of people when they're like casting or they're nervous about talking in front of a group or something like that, they speak really, really quickly. And when you speak really, really quickly, you can blow through the content and the words that you want to say, and then 20 seconds later, you're like, okay, like I've got nothing to say because I just pounded out 100 words in 20 seconds, and like what now? What next? Yeah, GG, spent all your bank. Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of that aspect of it is just like learning, at least from a politician's perspective, like learning how to control your word pace and getting comfortable in front of a group so that you do have time to actually say what it is you're trying to say. Yeah. Right. How do you feel about new content? Right? Let's say they want to launch Age of Empires 3, the Asian Dynasties, with some of the ESOC patch maps and some of the ESOC patch balance changes, or perhaps all of them. But they also want to add in perhaps a few more cards for a few civs, and maybe they want to add a new civilization. Just the one. They don't want to go crazy. They just want to add, an extra civ just to play with and give people that little bit of extra reason to, come and try out the new game because there's this new thing and they're not just buying, a game they already own. Let's start with the civilization idea. I'd love it. It would bring me back much more. I mean, from my perspective, I've played Age of Empires 3 for the last 13 years, right? I know how Age of Empires 3 works. I've discovered most of what it is I'm interested in Age of Empires 3. From my perspective, the thing that keeps me coming back is it's something familiar and something that I can do without really having to think about and play with a friend once every couple months. Yeah. But if there were new content and there was like something like new to discover, like for me that would just like mentally be very stimulating, like something that I would really enjoy like playing around with and like looking at. I may have crossed the line as well as like I'm turning into an old man when it comes to video games, and I don't play video games necessarily to be competitive like I used to, whereas I enjoy much more just like the content and like bumbling around with the games now. I would love seeing a new Civ. I think it'd be really cool. Yeah. One of the reasons I love card games, and this applies to RTS as well, is that, for example, when I was really into Hearthstone, every time there was a new expansion pack, I got to try new things in this familiar setting. Like how the game works and how it plays, and you've got your game knowledge and like you can be good at something, but there's like new things to discover. The thing I like most, I think, is the optimization process of like refining a deck after you found a good idea and like tweaking it, and this applies to build orders, just making it a bit better here and there. I really like that process of getting to the best possible iteration. Yeah. And that, I think, is what makes games fun for me. And once I get there, suddenly it's stale and I'm like, basically it becomes meta. The very best decks that were refined and the very best strategies that got refined become meta eventually.
And once you get there, you either need balance changes to change what would be, to make the iteration process available again.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just take the robot patch, right? I know the robot patch pretty well. It's been in existence for the last 6 years ago, whatever. That's the last time they made any changes to it, right? And ever since then, Iroquois has been ridiculously overpowered. They're hands down the best civilization. But if you put a brand new civ with brand new cards, brand new play style, brand new mechanics, brand new whatever, right? All of the sudden, is Eero still the best civ? Like, we don't know, right? Nobody's going to know. Like, on day one when that civ drops, nobody's going to know whether or not Eero is still the best civ. There might be some people who play it and are good at the game and like can make a informed opinion on whether or not the new civ is good, but ultimately the conclusive opinion of is Eero still the best civ will continue to be challenged for months, maybe even a year, while people like explore this new civ, figure out how to play it. And to me, like, that alone is like an enticing prospect. Like, just the fact that like now we don't know like who's the best civ and whether or not every tournament should be this particular civilization, right? It just like it adds this aspect of the unknown, which I think would be really healthy for the game.
Yeah, I like the idea of new cards and maybe upgrading things that are just dead content that are rubbish, you know, perhaps a few of the native civilizations. The trouble is, this goes against what ESOC originally started out to do, which was minimalism and very minor changes to keep all the flavor intact, and we don't want to make all the civs the same, and we're going to go for this, like, let's not change that just because we can. Like everything they did was calculated and tried to basically be minimal. I think what ESOC patch tried to do was create authenticity through minimalism.
I've witnessed 2 patching efforts, right, of the Age of Empires 3 series. And the first was one that I led, and what our goal was, right, the meta of the day was more or less Age 2 must cuss. And what we tried to make it was so that every civilization would basically more or less have the same prospects of winning by having a Age 2 composition that could keep up with like the in-meta must cuss builds of the day.
Yeah.
And that was fine, but it just led to a more boring set of gameplay.
More homogenized in a way.
Yeah, it was just every civ like went musket and huss, and like all of a sudden you had Spain going musk huss in Age 2, right? Like, when was the last time you heard like in the robot patch like Spain's like good build was to go musk huss in Age 2, right? Like, it's not what people do. And then I've witnessed the ESOC patch, which although I've not really had any...
You were very, very skeptical at first. You laughed them out the door, actually. I remember.
Well, I'll get to the reason why I did that in a minute. But basically, when you look at the attempt here, I think more or less it's just been like make everything compatible to be some sort of like semi-FF boom strategy and have like...
I believe the term is two hands on dick semi-FF.
Yeah.
As Hazza puts it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like the meta, right? And so they've tried to like standardize everything around like that gameplay. And I don't know that that's any better than Must Cuss. I personally prefer to control Must Cuss more than Skirm Goon, and so I liked my fan patch better. That's completely...
You have some bias baked in there as well,
yeah.
Regardless of what you say. But go ahead.
The point that I think is the most important is, one, it'll be an official patch, so everybody will be forced to play it, which is good. That's why I didn't like fan patches, because I saw what our fan patch did and the destructive tendencies it had in the community to like create this isolation between high-level players and like the PR20 community, who is your up-and-coming community, right? Like, if you want a healthy community to continue to survive, like, you want those PR20s to feel like they're engaged with the game and understand like the mechanics behind what the top players are doing, and not we're playing two separate flavors of the same game, and what you do is completely irrelevant to me because I still have to somehow deal with a million Euro players in quick search, right? Like, it's just not, I don't know, necessarily healthy for the community.
The different metas, different games almost.
And then the other thing to realize is when ESO used to patch the game, I'm not convinced they would necessarily patch the game to make the game perfectly balanced. It was probably an attempt to swing it into a more balanced state, but it was also to like inject some interest and some question into the game, right? Like, sometimes there would just be big swings in in the balance, and all of a sudden like a new civilization would just be really, really good, right?
It just pops up out of nowhere. Yeah, you want people to be able to discover the iteration thing I mentioned.
But it's at least interesting and engaging, because now all of a sudden people are playing different civilizations and trying on new things, and like from a game health and staleness of the meta standpoint, like it's maybe more fun to witness and play. Even if it's not terrifically balanced, it maintains that fun aspect. And so I think what the ESOC patch, although it was a noble attempt to like keep the fun and the strangeness in Age of Empires 3, they kind of still homogenized everything into like one particular game style, which isn't necessarily, I don't think, the right thing to do either.
I don't know if I fully agree, but what I do think we both agree on is ESOC patch and perhaps the patch that's coming on Definitive Edition both need to be more adventurous with just random new things. I think what I would love to see is a new civilization, as we said, but also new cards and just new things to do. Like, let's take a look at the politicians. A fucking naturalist. 4 cows?
Yeah.
What? The bishop, 2 settlers.
Yeah.
And this is just the colonial age. There are a whole host of fortress age and industrial age politicians. Like literally 50% of them are just garbage, and you'd never consider it in a competitive setting ever. Like, let's go back to Age 2, where, like, these are the politicians 100% of games people will actually look at, right? There's 4 of them, but actually we only use 1, and that's if the civ has it, the quartermaster.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are others, in very edge case, you might consider something else, but certainly never the naturalist or the bishop. So I don't think the point of this is to say, what would we change to make these politicians better? Although I do want to ask you that question, because I just think it's fun to explore. But the main point really is, let's just go over these shite politicians and add some stuff to them that might actually make a few different build orders and play styles, and just inject some sort of different stuff into the game. So firstly, how would you change the naturalist?
Okay, so I've got a couple of opinions on this, right? And so my opinion of balance, right, and I think this is an interesting way to approach balance, is I don't necessarily want to change the intended mechanic or change the thing, right? So like the one we're talking about is the 2 cows one, right?
You get 4 cows.
I think that's an interesting mechanic, right? Like there could be like livestock builds or something like that.
Yeah, but like it would need to come with like a livestock pen as well, which is a thing. You know, you can get a livestock pen wagon.
We tried to do changes like that, and like by trying to make it something like intuitive, it breaks the mentality of like keep the game weird, keep it like interesting and dynamic, and tries to make like a build out of it. What I would propose is like there has to be some number between 4 and, I don't know, 500. I think if you got 500 cows, right? If you got 500 cows, we would agree that there's infinite fast gathering food in your base is probably way too right? Regardless of what happens.
Yeah, let's start there, yeah.
So by mathematical definition, there has to be some number between 4 and 500 where we think the game is balanced. Agree?
Yes, okay.
So try and find what that number is. Keep it interesting.
Get more cows, okay.
Yeah, make it like, I don't know, is 12 cows too many? If it was 12 cows, would you pick it? Because 12 cows, like even unfattened, is 1,200 food.
Yeah, that's like shipping a bunch of bison to your base, except they're fast gathering.
Yeah, they gather like 3 times as fast or whatever. It'd be pretty good, I think.
And you just eat them right away.
Yeah, it'd be like eating slow crates, for example.
Yeah, okay, because I guess if you add a livestock pen, suddenly, okay, you get a livestock pen and 4 cows. This is still probably not great because you've only got 4 cows.
Yeah.
And you'd only ever do it on a map where there's perhaps goats and llamas or whatever else as well.
Yeah.
And the idea is, oh, I found 8 llamas. That might be good to have a livestock pen, because you might pen 8 llamas anyway.
Yeah.
And if you can age up with a pen and get 4 more cows as a bonus, I think what you just see is on the livestock pen maps, it might just become meta to age up with the naturalist. And okay, suddenly you've not got a very interesting game. You've just shifted it from 400 wood to 4 cows, or the naturalist politician. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
And I think you can do that with a lot of things, right? Because isn't there one that gives you like something with a couple priests and a church or something like that? Like that I've also never seen happen?
Let's take a look at, I think we should talk about politicians just for a bit, because I think they're like the key starting point for like interesting balance changes. Well, not balance changes per se, but new content changes.
Yeah. Outside of a brand new civilization. But I think we both agree if there was a brand new civilization, like people would just be super interested in absorbing that content, right? Like it just takes a long time to absorb that content.
Yeah, and I guess also from like a business point of view, making a new civilization is much more resource intensive than just changing some existing politicians.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the bishop.
Okay.
So he's an age 2 politician that is almost never ever something you would pick, because 2 settlers is just too slow. The time it would take 2 settlers to gather, let's say 400 wood, if we're going to compare it to the 400 wood politician, is like 400 seconds, right? It would take them 400 seconds, which is 6.6 minutes. So you'd never pick that. It's just bad. So would you pick 3 settlers?
Would you pick 5 settlers? 10 settlers? You'd probably pick 20, right? Like you definitely would pick 20. And so I think you can use like the same like balance mechanic, right? For a lot of those like...
Do you think so?
For a lot of like the quantity based ones, I think you absolutely can.
One balance change I thought of one time, which I thought was interesting, was that you should perhaps get a church wagon, which then might make some of the church techs actually interesting, because no one will ever build a church. It's just too expensive. But if you have a church, suddenly spies or making perhaps a priest that can heal and getting those line of sight upgrades, like, oh, they're suddenly like viable, like, which currently no one ever builds a church to get those because the church is just not worth the wood.
Yeah.
But if you happen to just have a church, that's probably great. And by extension of that, what I was thinking is perhaps you can only build one church. There is a build limit. But the church supplies 10 population like a house. The church is just a strictly better house. I think then people would just have churches, and maybe the church units and techs, which are currently not very good, would become maybe better.
I actually really like that. I also think that if you just made the church like pretty cheap, like 50 wood, the techs that are in the church are way overpriced, especially the line of sight ones. Like,
yeah.
So Great Coat has like a very similar look and feel, right? Like it comes from the market, which is a super necessary building because it has all of these like super powerful upgrades in it that are must-haves, right? Like multiple layers of very effective technology that you have to play the game. And Great Coat and Blunderbuss are these 2 like little upgrades to your villagers that if they were in the church, you would probably never make Great Coat, right? You just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It'd be like a expensive wood building that you don't necessarily want or need to have, plus some additional number of resources. So I completely agree that I think the church should be maybe 50 wood, build limit 1, and then the price of the techs needs to come down too. Like those line of sight techs I think are like 200 food and 300 food or something like that. They're like really expensive.
I had a look in the game and they supply essentially 0 extra line of sight. The number's so small that they actually give you, that the difference on the minimap that it makes is so negligible. I don't think they'd ever be worth it. I think the price is about right, but they need to do something meaningful.
Or something needs to change. And I think there's lots of technologies like that. Like the arsenal technologies, like a lot of the arsenal technologies don't get play. The only one that you really consistently see getting play is counter-infantry rifling, just because it's so good with skirmishers.
Yeah.
Like no one ever makes bayonets or...
Yeah, they're very expensive, aren't they?
Yeah.
Perhaps the arsenal should just be a 100 wood building.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to see some of those auxiliary buildings that don't get much play, make them more accessible.
Yeah, just make them cheaper. Like even artillery foundries could be made to 200 wood, just so that they're the same cost as a barracks. Currently, like to make some falconets, you build a foundry which is 300 wood, and then you usually only have enough resources for like 2 falconets or something.
Yeah.
So they're really expensive. And falconets, like, yes, they're really great because you can ship 2 of them and that's amazing, but like actually building them is something you rarely do in competitive play unless like you're totally food starved and you just have all this gold, and sometimes that can work out. But
what are other interesting buildings that are never made?
There's some for the war chiefs and the Asian dynasties, like the monastery, for example, or even the saloon. Like, what do you do with that?
You can make like more interesting like saloon techs, right? Like things that make your mercenaries train faster, or makes mercenary cards send faster, or it has some sort of trade-off effect, like they send faster but cost more gold or something like that. I don't know. Maybe it could introduce more strategy. Could be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to add new stuff. I've had this discussion on ESOC with some of the top players, and they're like, "Oh, that's not why I play. I've come back for this game that I know, and I don't think other people will buy that game if it's totally different." But I have the complete opposite opinion, and I don't agree with them at all. I think there are some top-level players that play because it's familiar and it's something they're good at. But I think if people are to come back to Age of Empires 3 for an afternoon, there needs to be some stuff to explore. And if they're going to kick around for a week or a month or longer, it needs to be like interesting build order stuff that they can like refine. They can go off the builds they used to know, and they can add extra things in. And I think Azamp would have a whale of a time. Imagine how much content and streams he could make out of like just a few changes to politicians and a couple new cards that shore up some weaknesses of some civilizations, or just add like new ideas.
Yeah.
Like I think this is sort of the direction ESOC needs to go. Like, they need to shoehorn in some bigger changes. Like, for example, are you familiar with the Spanish gold card that's come about for Spain recently?
No. What is it?
So let me explain. Spanish gold used to be a functionally useless card that would, I don't know, like double the HP of your galleons or something, some nonsense thing that was just so rubbish that it was never played.
All right.
But now what it does is you ship it. It's a Fortress Age card, and it delivers 400 gold instantly. And every shipment you send going forward will deliver whatever it's supposed to, but also will deliver you 400 gold as well.
No, that's kind of cool.
This is just confirming what you were telling me earlier about, making them all basically eco semi-FF builds. But Spain now has this option to keep up with other civilizations where they can send Spanish gold early on and then have this return, this 400 gold. It keeps up with France and it keeps up with Germany and whatever else. The thing is, though, it's not like an ordinary upgrade card because, if you were to send like 50% upgrade to gold or whatever, that's consistent and it like scales with the number of villages you have. Mm-hmm. Whereas with this, every shipment takes longer to arrive. So actually the benefit of Spanish gold decreases over time, whereas other eco upgrades tend to increase over time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The autumn tournament was just announced. I think this is where we might see some Spanish gold sort of stuff being played. I experimented a bit because I like Spain, and it was fun. It gave you this new style that wasn't this all-in fast fortress.
Yeah, going back to your comment of like older players saying, this isn't the game we know, this isn't the game we love, we don't like it anymore, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. That very much sounds like 2014 Zuta, right? Like, I came back to the game, like, I want to be familiar with the game, I like the game that I like, don't try and change my mind about the game. But I think as you get maybe out of the like ultra competitive mentality, because let's face it, I haven't played the game competitively for 3 or 4 years, whatever it's been. I haven't tried to be good at the game in a long time. And when you lose that mentality and you lose the mentality of like having the strength of your gameplay be based on understanding like all of the things and knowing more mechanics of how the units interact with each other and that kind of thing than your opponent, you are interested in keeping like a stable game that doesn't change much and has like that mechanic to it. But I think as soon as you go into the like, let's make the game fun and like I just want to have a good time with the game, I think more and more people would be absolutely in favor of having the game just have new fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably play ESOC Patch if like everyone was forced onto it, and I do play ESOC Patch, but I'd find it so much fun if there was just a bunch of like new stuff to experiment with, and I'd really like that.
Yeah, me too. I think it'd be really fun.
Well, one final thing then, Age of Empires 4, where do you think they're at with it? Because they announced it quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Like, it was briefly after our podcast, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't heard anything since, so it's sort of about a year, and we've heard nothing more. Where at a stage in development do you think that could possibly be, or do you think they announced it too early? I remember watching Game of Thrones, and then the announcement came after that, and I was so hyped from like one of the final episodes in season 7 of Game of Thrones, and then I saw this like thing on Facebook about Age of Empires. I wonder if they like coordinated the release at the same time for the hype. I doubt it, but it's possibly a theory. But I haven't heard anything since.
Yeah, it's tough to know where you're at with a game. Like, really all you need to make that announcement is like one executive to like have floated up his management chain like, hey, I'm gonna make another Age of Empires game. And he says, okay, that's great, like, go for it, here's your budget. And then he goes on to Facebook and says, I am making a new Age of Empires.
Okay.
Coming soon, TM. Like, that's all he needs to do, right? Like, that could have been the stage that they made that announcement. So, given some of the thoughts that we've had leading up into this point of, like, hopefully they're, like, putting their due diligence into fixing some of the wrongs of the previous Age games. And honestly, my hope would be that we're a couple years off so that they can have enough time to properly make the game and give us, like, this great, brand new AAA product with all the bells and whistles that every Age player, like, wants and deserves.
You think that's what they're going for? The AAA masterpiece? They're really going to put out a big old product and it's going to be great and it's going to be that second coming of Jesus. I don't know why we keep going with these biblical references. I'm going to roll with what we did in the previous podcast. But basically it's going to be this game we're all wanting and hoping for. But why so early? It seems like the announcement was just timed wrong. Like, it just seems like, oh, here's an announcement, and if they genuinely, you're saying they could even be a couple of years off. So what? Plus the year we've already waited. 3 years.
Yeah.
Announcement, then 3 years. Is that like is that what companies do? I just feel like people would lose interest and forget about it. Or do you think it's a tactical thing just to keep the current Age of Empires player bases excited and keeping them playing rather than them just dwindling away into nothing, and by the time Age of Empires 4 comes out, they've got less people to sell it to?
They've got other things that we know are in their pipeline, right? Like they've released Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition. We know that they're continually making content for Age of Empires 2. We've had announced Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition is coming out, right? Like there's a lot of like content in their production pipeline. It can just be a ploy to say, hey, by the way, we're making this really new cool product. Like, by the way, also play our old stuff as well, right? You know.
It brings lots of eyes back, doesn't it? And people then maybe like get their wallets out when they go, oh yeah, I remember that. And there's an Age of Empires 4 coming. Maybe it's a good time to purchase and get invested on your Microsoft store that they're pushing.
But imagine how many people, as soon as like they got that linked from their friends, they just like click the follow button, right? And so now like you're just building this like social media presence and all of that kind of stuff as well.
That's a good point as well. That's a big point. It was delivered to me in a Facebook message from a friend of mine that vaguely knows that I make a YouTube channel, or used to. I like to still think that I do make a YouTube channel, but for a YouTuber, I don't make a lot of videos. Yeah. Anyway, hopefully that will change. My plans are quite big for Age of Empires. I'd really like to give it a go, and currently I'm saving and I've got lots of money prepared so that I don't have to work for a long time and I can basically take a big holiday and go all in on the YouTube and see what happens.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm not committed to a real job at the moment, and I've come out of university fairly recently, so I'm in that stage in my life where this would be a good time to do it.
Right.
So I'll fuck around with this, and then afterwards, if it works out, holy shit, that'd be awesome. If it doesn't, cool. It was just like a big holiday I had planned, an awesome game, and I had this great experience of something that's important to me in my life. And then I can go out into the real world and sell my soul to a company.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'll be there cheering you on. I've got bills to pay, and so I don't think I'm going to quit my job alongside you, but I'll be there being your number one fan.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe I can hop on and be your special guest from time to time.
Yeah, I know H2O's got some plans with me, SmackDown related.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. By the way, for anyone that is wondering, that is something we're still thinking about, but it probably won't be happening till after the summer now. But Zuter, you're very, very welcome always to come on SmackDown.
I'll try and swing by. My life has just been busy, but when I do get time, it's fun to, if nothing else, reminisce about the old days and talk with some friends that I made during the time that I did play. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right, I think we've done it. I think that's the podcast.